Hi, today we're working on our Modern Dresden project, and today we're going to focus on the border. And I'm going to do something very different for this. I'm taking my inspiration from some of the illustrations that I've seen, and we're going to start that right after this. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, we're back, and today we're working on the border for our Modern Dresden project. And I'm taking my inspiration from some illustrations in Mary Engle, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Engelbrett, some of her books. And she has the cutest little checkerboard pattern that sometimes she runs along the top and bottom of her illustrations in her books and her other art works. So we're taking that checkerboard in the black and white as the inspiration for our border, and that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a checkerboard, just 2 rows that runs around the 4 blocks in our quilt. So I want to run through really quickly how we do this. It's as easy as can be, but because there's so many small pieces, it can be a little intricate or challenging maybe sometimes. But I'm going to tell you exactly how I got started with this and how to put it together. So I bought 1 yard of solid black and 1 yard of solid white fabric when I was purchasing my fabrics for this project. And I decided that I wanted the little blocks to be 1 inch finished. And that will go along with the scale of the Dresdens that we're doing, because we wouldn't want it, we wouldn't want it really large, and we don't want it really tiny to go with the plate. So I think that the 1 inch is going to be a good matchup for that. All right, enough of that, right? So we're going to take our fabric and we're going to cut 1.5 inch strips from both the black and the white, and you're going to need equal amounts of each fabric. So I already have some of those done. I just used my regular ruler and my rotary cutter, and I cut these strips. This is not cooperating. And right now I've cut 4 of each. I was thinking that when you think about the rough math, that if the project is going to be roughly 25 by 25, 3 strips probably would do it. But there's going to be a lot of seams in here. So I went ahead and cut 4 strips to make sure we had enough fabric cut. Okay, so we did that with the white and with the black. And I came up with, well, you know, I dropped one on the floor. So what I did was I took these strips and I put the 2 together with the selvages here, and I just made them so that they matched up perfectly. They're the same size. And then I'm going to run a seam right down the edge, one of the edges, with my 1/4 inch foot. And then I did that so that I had 4 strips together, and it looks like this. Now you're going to look at this and say, but Kim, that strip on the top and that strip on the bottom are much wider. And yes, they do appear to be, because we don't have a seam at the top and the bottom yet. And that's the discrepancy in the sizes when you look at this. Now, accurate and adequate pressing is going to be needed to make this work. So you're going to put your seam in, and you're going to make sure that it's the right seam. And then once you get that in, you're going to need to press it. And you're going to need to press it so that the seams are pulled completely out and they're pressed down flat. That's going to be a hot iron, probably with some steam or some starch to make that happen. And you need that little pull in there to make sure that you've got 1-inch squares when you're done. Then, and we're going to go through this kind of quickly because it's really not a hard concept. It's just making sure that you do the steps accurately along the way. Then once you have the 4 strips together, then you're going to start cutting. And from each of these strips, you're going to cut 1.5 inch strips cut like this. Now, what I did was I cut 2. And I made sure that my cutting line was on top of the fabric, not off the fabric. And I would check every 2nd to 3rd cut to make sure that you're cutting perpendicular to the stripes. So now you've got 2. They look just alike. There's 4 here. So if you turn this one upside down, now you've got a checkerboard. Pretty swift, huh? And what we need to do is we need to sew this together in the middle. Now, I will tell you this. When you start doing this, you want to make sure that you're consistent with the way they're sewn. So once you get one set sewn together, you want to make sure that you sew the next one just exactly like it. If you don't, what happens is you start going on your strip and go to hook on the next piece and it doesn't match. So for example, here we go. These don't match. Even if you turn it around, they don't match because you sewed here when you should have sewn here. That's okay though. Put that aside. I'll show you how to fix that shortly. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to sew enough of these together. We know our finished product is supposed to be 25 inches. So that's what we're going to shoot for, 25 little blocks. And when you get to 25, stop. And then what we'll do is once we have all 4 strips with 25 blocks long and 2 blocks across, we're going to stop and then we'll make the corner pieces that go into this. And you're going to need to be mindful that when you turn that corner, then you've got to make it match up. So I would tell you that you will continue to make these the same way because you're going to have to match them up not only this way, but when they come the other way as well. So you may want to stop from time to time and kind of lay it out and see when you get to the end of 25, is that next strip going to work for you? And here's a situation where that one I told you that didn't match, if you turn it 1/4 of the way around, then it matches up. Interesting, huh? So just be mindful of what you're doing. Don't get too far along in the progress that you can't add in one strip and solve the problem. And remember, you can always take these apart to just have the 2 pieces in case you need to just slip one in here to make it match. Or you couldn't sew just 2 strips together to make all of your design come together. That's very easy to do, and that's probably what I will do. I will probably get a good number of these together, maybe in the neighborhood of 20 long, and then start kind of lining them up to see that I have enough to turn that corner and move on. Don't sew it together in a square though. because we need to get the 4 pieces in our green and blue fabric sewn together into a finished piece before we know the accurate measurements for this. We're going to have to be somewhat static on how big that is, meaning we may need to let out a seam or take in a seam in this fabric, or we may need to ease here because we need to match up those. And it needs to be a situation where in that corner we can get 4, just a little square of 4 blocks to make that turn. That might have been a little confusing, and if it was, I apologize. But I will add some footage as we go on with this so you can see exactly how that's going to work. Now, I did want to show you, I'm not going to sew this long strip to each other because I think you know how to do that. And there's really no need for it. But I do want to show you how to sew the one little half checkerboard to the other little half checkerboard, because that's going to be something that's going to require a little bit of attention, and I want to bring your attention to that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pin it together. And we're going to start with these 2, and I've lined them up so they're going to make the checkerboard. And then I'm going to flip them over, and this is the seam I'm going to sew here closest to you. And I'm going to line up those seams in the middle and put a little pin in. And then I'm going to go to the next one and line up the seams so that they match and put a little pin in. Just on one side of it is sufficient. Now, the good thing is they match up pretty well, and I hope yours do too, but if they don't, you're going to need to ease them in so that you get a good crisp square. And they all do line up. Okay, we've got that. That's the side we're going to sew. For these, I don't necessarily tack it down while I'm sewing at the beginning or the end. I just want to make sure that I do stitch all the way so they don't pull apart. And probably again in a 2.4. There we go. And we're going to start this. And we're going to take the first couple of stitches, and then we're going to tug on this just slightly. And I would recommend chain sewing these so you can continue to kind of tug on the fabric, because we want to make sure that those seams are completely open. And then once you get past the first few stitches, then you can tug on the back end of the fabric a little bit to make sure that you're getting those stitches and getting those seam allowances pulled out so that you get your full size that you need. And we could run several through here. That would be the way I'd recommend that you do it. But we've sewn those. We've kept the seams the way they were pressed, and they were all pressed to the dark side. You could press them open, but you're going to have a lot of seams to contend with if you do that. And now when we open it up, I think you're going to see, it's kind of hard to tell because it's not been pressed, but all of our corners came together. So we've got a really good checkerboard going there. Now, here's the thing. The way I sewed it doesn't match the other section, but it does match this section. So I can sew these together. So I'm going to put them together so that I get that checkerboard design. And we're going to put one pin there because we've only got one seam in the middle to contend with. And I want to make sure that our edges where we start sewing and the edges where we end up sewing are going to match up. Sew a couple of stitches, and then we're going to use our little stiletto or the seam ripper, and I'm going to lift it up and get that seam ripper right in there, and then I'm going to tug on it just a little bit. There we go. It's really kind of difficult on that first little set of stitches because there's nothing to grab a hold of. But if you were strip piecing these together, you would be able to once you got started. Okay, so what do we have here? That first one is just a little bit off. We might want to go back in there and correct that. I probably would. If you notice, see, it's off just a little bit here. Don't know whether that was because it wasn't pinned just quite right when we did it. But I could take the stitches out right here in the middle. The ends are fine. And then just adjust it slightly and stitch over that again. And that would be sufficient. But that's going to be our checkerboard. And then that seam we're going to press probably open. They do better if they're pressed open because they lay flatter. Like I said, though, there's just so many folds in those seams to contend with that it could be problematic. I'm going to go ahead and take those stitches out right now and fix it before I move on. I just wanted to show you just how easily that could be fixed. And when you're doing it in little small sections like this, it's relatively easy to stop and fix it before you move on. Okay. I'm going to open that seam up so I can see exactly what's going on there now. I think that might have been part of the problem. And then I'm just going to stick it right back in there. And I am going to tug it just a little bit. Take my pin out. And it could be too that when I was sewing it before and I took the pin out so we could get through the foot, that it shifted slightly. Okay, now we're in much better shape. It's still just a tad off, but it's not so much off that you may not even notice it from your distance. So that's another set of the checkerboard. So I've got two here that are 8 by 2, and they are differing sections, but they will turn a corner. So we will just put that aside to be a corner, and I'll do the rest of them consistent with this one. And you're always going to be able to come back in and take just the 2 strips and make a 2-piece and put it in any place to add, regardless of which way you turn it. Okay, that's the way we're making our border. I'm sorry it's a little confusing. It's a little confusing to me when you sew it and you think it's right and it's not right, but that's okay. We'll get it. And I think once you start working with it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Okay, pretty easy concept. Like I said, just a lot of pieces, a lot of seams to keep track of. But isn't that cute? I think that's just going to be as cute as it can be. We're going to have these differing colors here in our project. And then we're going to have this checkerboard as our border. Pretty nice, huh? I wish I could find my other plate. It's somewhere here. It's probably underneath everything. Oops, here it is right here. There we go. And it could be that when we get closer, we decide that we need some type of sashing around the 4 pieces. To me, it looks a little close, but we will leave that decision till then. And as long as we do it in full 1-inch finished sizes, we'll just add 2 more blocks and keep it going. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm having fun with this project. I'm enjoying the designing on the fly. As it turns out, sometimes that's the way it works. And we will be back next week as we continue working on this. I appreciate you watching today. If you like us in this video and what we're covering, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel And we'll see you next time here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Have a great week.